Yes, thank you. Time for the satyr play. Actually, the name of the talk wasn't listed properly. The talk is actually called Behold, and then the other bit about labyrinths and Troy towns and Homer's Iliad. And you'll see in a second why it's called Behold. Some of you may be familiar with this image. It's Euclid's proposition 147. That's the 47th proposition, book 1 of Euclid's Elements. Probably you can recognize that it demonstrates what came to be known, or perhaps was known then as well, as the Pythagorean theorem. It's a marvelous proof. Although it has its detractors, Schopenhauer, I think, called it a mousetrap or something like that. But it's really an ingenious little thing. And of course, this theorem is central to all aspects of measurement science. Now, I want to emphasize it's the 47th proposition in Book 1. For most of the past couple of millennia, it's been known by that name. Einstein would have known it as 147. That means there are all these definitions one goes through in Euclid, then things he calls common notions, which he doesn't feel one has to prove. Then there are these things called postulates, which are things that need to be demanded of you before you can proceed with the propositions. And you know, if when I had the privilege of teaching Euclid, it would take me weeks to get to proposition 1. Those things are so fascinating. I just wanted to mention definition 4, I think it is, which is the definition of a straight line. Now, as important as this proposition 147 is for measurement science, if you look at Euclid's definition of a straight line, I think you'll agree with most people who do look at it that he has failed in defining a straight line without invoking a circle. Now, you know, currently we tend to use a pragmatic definition like the shortest distance between 2 points. But it should be quite obvious to you that such a definition is quite useless if you're trying to found measurement science. All right, so the next time somebody begs one of you for, you know, the math, where's the quantitative backing, say, define straight and get back to me. Okay, now, this is how Euclid did it. In the notes to this proposition by Thomas Heath, the English scholar of the 19th century, there was an Indian mathematician from the 12th century AD, I believe, 12th century, who, in trying to prove this proposition, simply drew this figure and said, "See?" That is to say, you know, behold. None of these 47 propositions, definitions, axioms, postulates. Inspect the figure, you can probably convince yourself that it demonstrates the case, that each hypotenuse of the right triangle is the side of the square, the large square. Each of the 4 right triangles around the perimeter has an area of half times AB, if A is the short side and B is the long side. The little square in the middle has a side of B minus A, so that you add that as B minus A quantity squared. I don't believe this Bhaskara used algebra, because I don't believe it had been invented yet, but there's a way to inspect the figure and convince yourself that it shows that C squared equals A squared plus B squared. Right, so these are the 2 methods, 47 propositions and behold. I think it's important to make these distinctions, like, for example, this idea of inspection. In a day and age when the discourse is so juvenile, in a way, on television and so on, between people who associate themselves with reason and science and anthropogenic global warming, distinguish themselves from creationists and catastrophists and other kinds of people who don't believe in science, quote unquote, to characterize, you know, the argument. There's so much more to talk about between induction, deduction, inspection, which is neither of those but related to all 3 of them, and so on. What the difference between a common notion and a postulate and a proposition. Amongst propositions, the difference between a theorem and a problem, and so on. I just want to highlight it because it frustrates me in the media, that these distinctions are made, and it becomes very easy to critique with a broad brush the kinds of claims that are made in the electric universe, under the umbrella of the electric universe. Right, so behold. The inspiration for this talk was from some emails exchanged amongst people involved in Thunderbolts about petroglyphs called cups and rings. And here's a good example. I'm not going to bother you with sources. This is from Wikipedia. It's nice because it has cups and rings identified there. There's impressions in the rock and these circles and this sort of tail or invagination that comes down like this. So that's the basic form of the cup and ring. Here's another one. This one from Galicia. You see a kind of this tadpole-like thing, rings, a depression, and a sort of tail. Now these are also called cups and rings, and I put this there to just point out that not everything that is a cup and a ring is necessarily a cup and a ring. Okay, I mean there's cups there, there's depressions, but I'm not sure how to connect what is being called here a cup and ring petroglyph to the previous ones, which have a kind of identifiable form. This looks simply like a cup, if it even looks like that. But I just wanted to highlight that this is what they're called in the quote-unquote literature. Another one from Spain. Again, it's slightly more spidery. Incidentally, I'm not going to make any claims about the cosmic provenance of these things. I think Rens van der Sloot would have talked about the polar column in relation to that tail or invagination. I believe Eduardo Cardona has things to say about the rings. Ed Cochran might have had something to say. Dave Talbot. Those are the people to ask questions about what this represents. But it is a petroglyph, and it is found all over the place. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I want to make some identifications and say, behold. So, next one. This is something that happened just a couple of years ago. It was an image from Scandinavia of something that happened in the sky, something very, very secret. The Russians fired a sort of rocket, this is the explanation anyway, that went haywire and produced this trail in the sky, visible all over the place. It was quite a YouTube sensation. You see the form of it. The reason I thought it was worth putting it up was that we're looking here clearly down a cone. And it is the case that in these cups and rings that the center is this depression, so that it may actually be a representation of something three-dimensional like this cone. Okay, now this is just to make a point. My father, in a rare event, set me this puzzle. Draw this figure with your pen to the paper in one stroke without lifting the pen from the paper. Okay, that was the puzzle. I'm afraid I'm going to have to give you the answer right away. If you could just show the next one. What you do is you draw two sort of M's, draw a line underneath it, another M, and then connect four corners. So what you have is a sort of rhombus with diagonals and four odd curves on each side. What I'm trying to illustrate with that, apart from just telling a little story about my father, was that one has to see in order to see, right? I mean, probably there were cues in the original picture that suggested this has to be a square, these have to be semicircles, but what's actually there is a rhombus with diagonals and four curves, right? And so identifying figures in petroglyphs can have this kind of dimension to it, where you really have to define as much as see, or seeing and defining become kind of one process. That's by way of illustrating that this is a Cretan labyrinth. Okay, it's the same thing. It's a cup and ring. You see the circles, you see the invagination. This is how it's known, however, as a Cretan labyrinth. And this is why I would say even more that the picture I showed you, I think it was from Italy, of a simple cup, is not of the same species. But this is what's called, elsewhere in Northern Europe, a cup and ring, in my opinion. It's got the form, in other words. Another labyrinth, also from Spain. You know, this is in Galicia, where that cup and ring thing is, one of the earlier pictures. And yet, for some reason, people identify them differently. But again, I think we're looking at the same thing. It's a labyrinth. Or that is to say, the cup and ring figures and labyrinths are of one origin, depicting one thing. Medieval labyrinth, you might be more familiar with. This is from India, just to show you the provenance of this. Again, the circle, sometimes it's a concentric circle, sometimes it's nested circles with, that is, with two different paths out, and always this invagination. I call it. It's asymmetrical because of this kind of entry point. Thank you. Now, this is where the talk came together. Same thing, right? Please say yes. But these things are called Troy towns, or Caerdroia in Wales, or Trojaborg in Scandinavia. You see the same idea with the circles and the invagination. The reason this talk happened is because I'd seen these pictures before, and I saw these cup and ring images, and I said, this is that. And it's a mystery to me. These images are, I think, all of them from Northern Europe, exactly where you find the cup and rings, and yet they're called by different names. But here's the interesting bit for me, that is why I found it. Why are they called Troy towns, or cities of Troy? Are they actually connected to Troy? I came across these images in a book called Where Troy Once Stood. It's a book by a man named Iman Wilkins, who by no definition could be called a scholar. He wrote, well, Where Troy Once Stood is England, right? Yes, near Cambridge. And the Trojan War was fought in the Wash, which is this area of East Anglia. Yeah, but that's why he's not very taken very seriously. I'll say these things for him, though. I did take it seriously. He's a middling etymologist. There's a lot more vigor than rigor in his argument. But the basic idea is something very compelling. First point is negative. If you think that the Trojan War was fought in that place in northern Anatolia, Hisarlik, it's not only Homer who was blind, but his audience. Certainly none of them had ever been to Anatolia, as neither have I, but you just have to see the pictures. It didn't happen there. The Hellespont, as it's called now, is this strip of water that separates Europe and Asia. It's a bridgeable thing. Xerxes, wasn't it, who did it? Built a bridge of boats and crossed into Europe across it. Whereas in Homer, it's the infinite Hellespont. That is the infinite sea of hell. And it's a misty, oceanic thing with tides, massive tides. It's gray or wine dark. It's not the Mediterranean. That doesn't make it, Cambridge or the River Cam, the River Scamander. But there's a compelling case that, hurry now. These things did not happen in Turkey. We better go to the next one. This is a thing called Devil's Dike, which is in East Anglia. And the thing to point out is that if you inspect the figure, there's a lot that you have to unpack from it. This is a thing called Devil's Dike in a continuously populated region because it's a massive earthwork about which none of the people in the area have a story. It's Devil's Dyke. On the other hand, in Greece, you have this story about Trojan Walls or Trojan dikes and a battle that was fought. These are clearly defensive dikes to protect a city from an invasion from across the water. So one has to inspect the figure just like one has to inspect a fossilized dinosaur with its neck broken and ask, how did that get here and what is its form? That's what inspecting would be, right? At the top is just the picture of the proposed location of Troy, the Gog Magog Hills near Cambridge, and below is another picture of that dike. You can barely see a couple of human figures to get an idea of the dimensions there. This is Glastonbury Tor. I guess the things we know about this are what it's not. It's not a city, unless perhaps a city of hobbits. It's not an agricultural project. To me, it bespeaks a kind of obsession with rock art that takes it to another dimension. Again, I don't know what this circular form is supposed to be, but it's this conical circular form. Again, from the air, Glastonbury Tor. This is probably the most familiar image of this kind of city to you. It's Minas Tirith from Tolkien, Peter Jackson's film, The Lord of the Rings. This city of circles, right? It's a counterintuitive form for a city. I mean, when Europeans built cities in America, they built grids, Cartesian grids, right? There are some aspects about it that perhaps could be useful in a practical way. But I would suggest the original sense was something about a circular structure hiding something sacred, precious, dangerous within it. The Holy of Holies, the Minotaur, what have you. But yeah, that's the form you'd know. Minas Tirith. Tolkien tapped into an archetype. This is a reconstruction of Atlantis from Plato's Critias. It's based on the description in that dialogue. This is a lovely thing. It's actually it's supposed to be a depiction of Jericho from the 15th century, but you can see the form of it. This notion of this city had become so archetypal that even Jericho was retroactively depicted in this way. You see, again, the maze and the invagination. Now, was Ilium, I guess I'm really not going to be able to get into this except in private, actually a city of this form? I can demonstrate that it was. It's not an esoteric reading of Homer. It's more in the line of the idea that everybody already knew that this was so, and it's not, so there's no point in telling it. But there's a certain aspect of the way in which Hector and Andromache meet in Book 6 of the Iliad, which requires that the city be of this form, and that Hector and Andromache proceed in opposite directions so that they meet at the gate, right, for the last time. It's a long story, it's too good to summarize. They meet, the gate is called the Skian Gate, or Skian Gate. The name is obscure, but it appears to mean the Western Gate, so that the city was apparently aligned with the current cardinal points, you know, the Occident and the Orient of that period. Now, okay, where this gets to, now, I've suggested that the city of Ilium itself may have, if you didn't catch it, that's what I was getting at, is a kind of rock art, a depiction of something archetypal in the sky that finds expression in much smaller forms. What I'm turning to now, and this will be brief, is a man named Cedric Whitman, who is was a scholar of the last century at Harvard, who wrote a book called Homer and the Heroic Tradition. I think this is illustrative because in order for him to be read, he had to subscribe to the then prevalent, still prevalent theory of the oral composition of Homer. it's very much like the situation of getting published in any field. You have to seem to subscribe to the orthodoxy, and then you slip in what you're really saying. But let me just read briefly from Cedric Whitman. Not only in the associations of images and conceptions of both divine and human agents does the Iliad reveal its unity, but also in the matter of external form. It is now time to look at the whole poem as a series of scenes and observe how these scenes are related to each other. As indicated before, Homeric scenes are analogous to the formulae in that they follow a typology designed to assist the singer. Scenes of battle, arming, debate, supplication, lamentation, and jubilant victory bear a formal as well as an ideational resemblance to each other, though in Homer a vast degree of variety and shading has been achieved through the expansion, compression, or modification of the basic motifs. This typology of the scenes in the poetry of Homer and other oral singers has been the subject of excellent studies, and one does well to keep in mind the warning of Parry. The Milman Parry is the source of the oral theory of Homeric composition, not to find falsely subtle meanings in the repetitions as meant to recall an earlier scene where the same words were used. And yet, though such echoes would be present in all singers' efforts, one of the traits of Homer's excellence seems to have been the gift to control these echoes more than other oral poets have done. I'll just read one more thing briefly from him. This is Whitman again. The function of a norm is to regularize, but the effect of experience at large is to refract upon the norm infinite lights and perspectives. Hence the variety of Homer, a variety which could not be so complex and subtle if it did not echo constantly from the normative columns of a ritualistic and formulaic fixity, transforming them into whispering pillars. I just had to read that because, again, I said, Whitman is read because he subscribes to the oral theory of composition. And it's not something that I'm sympathetic to, but I don't think there's anything better in Homeric criticism than his whispering pillars. Okay, now what he did in that chapter was to lay out a kind of geometry of the Iliad. That is to organize the scenes, or simply to list the scenes that occur in the whole of the Iliad and connect them by means of rings. Ring composition is something that could take a whole lecture. You see it at the most primitive level, the so-called, and the most complex, from, say, farmers passing on advice to each other or storing information to each other. Ring composition means you say, the last thing that you say re-echoes, either repeats or evokes the first thing that you said. It's understood to be a mnemonic thing, but it becomes a stylistic thing in storytelling, right? But when you go to the other extreme, ring composition is basically the essential form of classical music. Right? I mean, it occurs at every level of the discourse of civilization. And of course, classical music is based in dance, and that's where I think Homer's rhythm also comes from. But okay, so Whitman laid out these scenes and connected the various points that can be connected. This can be done a number of ways, but as Bob Johnson said yesterday, the universe is still electric. So I'm going to show you, however you do it, that is. But I'm going to show you what this looks like. I think perhaps you can spot the invagination. What occurs there is the setting fire to the ships of the Achaeans by Hector and the Trojans. It is literally the tipping point of the war. And it's marked by an invocation to the Muses. And this happens at the beginning of the Iliad and the Odyssey. In one other place I know of in the Iliad, perhaps Bill Mullen can remember another one, when he introduces the catalogue of ships. But there's one here. I'll just read it briefly. This is from book 16 of the Iliad. It's simply this. Espetenun moi muosai olympia doma tekosai, hoppos der proton pur empese neusina kaion. Tell when first fire fell upon the ships of the Achaeans. I want to just call attention to the fire, because it's the same word in Greek that you translate lightning, that you translate fire. In Aristotle's system of the world, it's the fourth element, where the other ones correspond neatly to solid and liquid and gas. Fire is ether in glow mode. Is plasma in glow mode. I was going to say ether maybe is plasma in dark mode. But, anyway, what can I say to this except, behold?